Hello and welcome to Taskmaster Talks with Kevin Sullivan. I am your host, JP John Posman, the two-man power trip. And of course, joining me, the star of the show, the former WCW and ECW World Tag Team Champion, one of the greatest minds and bookers ever in the history of the wrestling, the man behind the 83 weeks of dominance, Mr. Taskmaster, Mr. Games Master, the devil himself, Mr. Kevin Sullivan. Kevin, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, JP. How are you, my friend?
I am doing very good. I actually recently spoke to a good friend of yours, Mr. Bob Mold. Remember good old Bob?
Oh, yes. How's he doing?
Very good. He's back on tour. He's doing, his music thing.
Yeah, he had a hell of a gig there for a while. You know, I think he still lives in San Francisco, doesn't he?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah, and he had a great gig because he was living in Germany part of the time, too, because last time I saw Bob I was in San Francisco at the Cow Palace for a show a few years ago. And Bob was telling me that I probably don't have him in the right sequence, but like on Friday he worked in Berlin, Saturday he worked Paris, and Sunday he worked London. Not bad, huh?
Oof, not bad at all.
I used to do that. No, I used to rib Jim Barnett years ago when he owned Georgia Championship Wrestling. And if we had a local show like the Chattanooga, you know, that's like 100 miles from Atlanta, I would call Jim and say, "Hey, Jim, you want to go to the Chattanooga with me tonight?" He'd say, "Kevin, my boy, if it is in London, Paris, I don't want to hear about it."
Love it. Bob is doing good. He actually said, I believe, when you guys were in San Fran, you may have had to pick him, or he may have had to pick you up at the airport.
Yeah, we hooked up. We went to lunch. We came into the show. They threw a pretty good house at the Cow Palace, you know what I mean? That was the first time I had been back to the Cow Palace. For a while, this is a strange deal. When I worked in Knoxville, Mulligan was running San Francisco from Knoxville. He was sending his tapes when Shias retired. Then afterwards, we were running San Francisco from Florida. So, and I got to have like my final swan song there as a babyface. Before they were sending tapes in from Florida, but they were sending old tapes with me as a babyface. So I got to wrestle Junior a few times there, and then they switched the tapes when I became a heel, and I ended up working with Dusty in San Francisco a few times. So it's one of my favorite places in the world.
And Bob, he's back at it doing the touring and everything else. So pretty cool that he's still doing his thing.
Yes, it is. And I'm glad for Bob. Bob used to come down when I lived in the Keys. He used to come down a couple of times a year, stay in my guest house, and we go out in the boat. We had a good time.
Funny, he said when he was with WCW and he had Bischoff and Russo in April of 2000 coming together, he's like, nope, I quit. These two aren't going to be able to work together. Brad Siegel couldn't see it, but for some reason Bob saw it immediately, like, these two not going to work together.
Yeah, Bob had a great feel for the business, like you do, JP. He had a great feel for the business, and he told me that it wasn't going to work. And for whatever reason, I was gone when that was going on. He hit that one right on the head. He was a big Eric supporter, too, like most of the guys were. You know, Eric probably doesn't get his due. We always hear negative things about WCW at the end. But Eric was a visionary. He thought outside the box. And he knew the NWO, that was an angle shot in Japan, and he was in Japan at the time. I happened to be watching a YouTube Steve Austin's Broken Ranch. It's an old one with Kevin Nash on it. And Kevin told me something that blew me away. When the NWO first came and they were selling merchandise, they weren't selling merchandise in the arena. They were selling merchandise out of the truck because it was supposed to be bootleg because they didn't work for us, right? There's another thing that shows you how smart and knowing small details. They wanted to do Kevin's shirts, make NWO shirts and sell them in the arenas. He said, no, if we don't work for you or coming in, we're not going to do that. But this is a roundabout way for me to give you the punchline. When they went to Osaka, they went to the big building there. It's like the Tokyo Dome. I can't remember the name. Maybe it's the Osaka Dome. Now, I don't know if these numbers are padded, but and I know this is over 22 years ago. They were selling they had leather jackets, and they were selling those for $500 or $800 a piece. Nash said that they sold $5 million worth of merchandise that night.
Whoa.
Whoa is right.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah. Even if
they still sell millions for WWE every year.
Yeah, even if it's inflated a little, it still was a phenomenon. And here's something that I kind of have a hard time wrapping my head around it. It's probably because I'm not that smart, but we see now a lot of factions, don't we?
Ooh, too many.
Yeah, and it's like they're trying to catch that lightning in a bottle, and you're in a field and you're running around with that bottle, and the lightning striking way in the distance. I mean, that was one of those things that everything fell in place. The internet wasn't that strong then. People thought that they were coming in from the outside. You turned the number one draw in the history of the wrestling business at that time, or maybe arguably so, for the biggest draw of all times, heel. And it just put the cherry on the sundae because all three of them had come from New York. Two of them had been the WWF champion at different times. And then Hall was Intercontinental champion. So that was a monumental moment in time. And I don't know if you can recapture that. What do you think, JP? Can you?
Oof. Honestly, no. I think they've been trying to for years. You can't recapture a moment like that. I don't even know how you would do it, but there's no way. You just can't.
No, and I think the main reason is the internet. You know what I mean? Dave only had the sheet going out, right? So I don't know back then when the NWO started how many. I know he's successful, but he wasn't as successful as he is now. And that was a limited number of people reading those sheets. So the people bought in. And if the people didn't buy in, they certainly left their willing suspense of disbelief at the door. And it was, Nash said also the night in Disney where the police came because they thought it was real. he told Austin, he said, they asked if they could use ball bats. And I was shaking my head, yes, but saying, no matter what you do, you can't use ball bats. No, you can't. And that's the famous spot where Nash threw Rey Mysterio like he was a dart into the trailer. We broke kayfabe because it was the Horseman against the Dungeon, and Jimmy Hart came running down, and we all joined forces and ran back and got our brains beat in. And the Disney switchboard lit up. People were saying there was a gang of thugs attacking in Disney. So I don't think you could do that again.
Definitely not. It's a moment in time, as they love to say. Moment in time.
Yeah.
And can't forget Crazy Macho Man either, jumping on that limo.
Yeah,
Remember? He jumped on the top, yeah.
Try to get in the sunroof, right?
He's nuts. Yeah.
He was nuts. He was nuts, but a good nuts. I really became very good friends with Randy. Years before that, Randy and I would be in bodybuilding contests. He was in the novice, I was in the open, and we became friends for life. He was very good to me, very gracious.
So as far as today and today's topic, the topic at hand, WCW Capital Combat 1990, which was on May 19th, Washington, D.C. at the D.C. Armory. The attendance was over 7,500. The tagline, Return of RoboCop, and the pay-per-view buys 160K. So not terrible there, especially going heads up with WWF.
Yeah, and this is another one of those things where the North Tower got involved. The RoboCop thing was a disaster. I knew what they were trying to do, get crossover and promote. I think the movie was done by, what was the name of Turner's movie production company? It wasn't Timeline. I'll think of it. But, they had produced the movie, so they rightfully thought, well, let's push the movie with the hottest thing we have in our catalog. And that was, Nitro and the pay-per-views and WCW itself.
So it was really their idea to do it, not your guys' idea.
No. I mean, we kind of knew that this wasn't going to go over. You know what I mean? And this goes back to we had RoboCop, right? WWE had Mike Tyson because Vince comes from a wrestling family. Think about this. Vince's grandfather was promoting wrestling in the gardens. Now, Stephanie and Sean, it's their great-grandfather. Think about that lineage.
Pretty crazy. You go all the way, like you said, back to Jess McMahon. Pretty crazy to do that, yeah. So when you look at this, and it's like, okay, it's not your idea, it's Turner pushing it. Does that hurt or help you guys? You know, it's like, oh, you get forced on you get forced RoboCop necessarily.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you can't bucket because it's Turner. We fell in also to Turner Entertainment. They were trying to get the most bang for their buck. And because the North Tower didn't have wrestling people, they thought, well, how hard can wrestling be? This was just a great opportunity for us. So I understood the thinking, and I think everybody did. But it was trying to put a steak on top of a coconut pie. They're both foods, but they don't go together. To
me, it's like, okay, you can do stuff with wrestling and movies, but I don't know, it came off a little corny with RoboCop.
You're being very kind. I mean, guys were shaking their head in the dress room. I mean, they understood, and the guys didn't bitch about shit like that because they understood it wasn't coming from the wrestling end; it was coming from the North Tower end. And they just grinned and bared it because they understood there was nothing we could do.
So RoboCop 2 obviously doesn't have the success of RoboCop 1, but it did end up making money. Do you guys get any sort of credit, even though obviously, it's funny thinking get credit, but do you guys get any sort of credit for helping promote the movie?
I don't think so. But, I mean, they didn't come out and say to us, "Oh, thank you guys very much," but they had to know that we helped. Do you know what I mean? And the funny thing, how many sequels hit what the first movie did? I mean, there's exceptions to the rule. Fast and Furious in this generation, the Rocky franchise, but let's go back to Ghostbusters. Every sequel they've had two, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They didn't draw. It takes, again, lightning in a bottle. Sometimes it's hard to repeat.
And it's, not as good as the first one either. I mean, the first one is a lot better. I still like it. I still enjoy it, but it's just not as good.
Right.
When you look at, like, the money, I think it made $45 million and the first movie made $55 million, but the budget was more for the second one than the first one, too. So, obviously, the first one did a lot better, but it did good enough where they made RoboCop 3, so, and which, wasn't as good either.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'd be interested to know, did most of the money come from overseas? I could see that working big in Japan and the Asian countries.
Good question. I know that the worldwide gross was $45 million. So yeah, it doesn't break off what, but I'm guessing you're right. It's probably a pretty good contingent over there overseas as far as making a ton of money.
Right.
Not much unlike what it is today for a lot of those big movies.
Right. I mean, and then because of that, I'm just surmising this, and I may be way off base. We started to see an influx of Japanese-themed movies. What's the one where the girl walks backwards on her hands and knees? Was it The Ring?
Yes.
You can't watch the tape, right? Isn't that it?
Yep.
And we've seen a lot of directors come out of that part of the world. Sullivan Rundy, is that his name? That did those movies. He did that movie where the people were in a fenced-in area and they didn't know it. You couldn't go past it. And at the end of the movie, it was like they were back in the 1600s or 1700s. Then back at the movie, at the end of the movie, they come out and there's a street in a highway. You know which one I'm talking about?
No. Mm-mm.
He did a couple of semi-horror movies. I'll tell you, who's the actor that played in the the piano? It was about a Jewish survivor in Germany that played the piano. He played in a couple of his movies. He was big there for a while. He was also in Pinky Blinders, played the mafia guy at the end to try to take over the Pinky Blinders.
Oh, Adrian Brody.
Yeah, Adrian Brody. He was in that movie. So, I mean, now we're seeing movies based upon movies made. Well, let's go way back in the day. Godzilla, right?
Mm-hmm.
The success we had from Godzilla, but it was started in Japan.
So with you guys, oh yeah. So with you guys, like having like RoboCop forced upon you, like whose idea is it? Like, okay, how we're going to use this guy? What are we going to make him do? How are we going to promote the movie? He's going to be on the cover of the VHS and everything else. Like, who decides like how he's going to be used? Did you guys come together? Does somebody else have a strong opinion as far as the booking committee?
No, they had a sheet what they wanted, what they didn't want, and that came from the North Tower, as well as I can remember. Eric might have had some influence there, but I don't think the North Tower appreciated Eric till later. I mean, I think they just took for granted that wrestling was an easy thing to do. Eric did
well, here in 1990, who's in charge in 1990? Because this is pre-Bishop, so it's obviously it's Flair at the helm, you, right. Jim Ross. So it's is I believe maybe Cornette. Yep.
Yeah. I think Eddie Gilbert was there too.
Ah, true. Yes.
So I mean, we all knew that what it was, and we couldn't let it affect us too bad. You know, we knew we were saddled with something that didn't belong.
Did you know you were not going to get Peter Weller? Did you know that?
No. I never understood that one either. Maybe, he had X amount of dates that he went out and promoted the movie, and that wasn't probably an add-on. Came in later, you know what I mean, before. I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe, don't they tell people that do these movies, you have 40, you have 30, you have 15, you have 150 play dates that you have to go on and push the movie? And it's usually...
You would think so, yeah.
Yeah, it's usually listed. I'm sure that was an add-on late because the movie was being done, a year and a half before it came out, probably?
Most likely.
Yeah, it took them a lot longer.
Yeah, it takes a while.
Yeah, it took them a lot longer back then, too. So, yeah.
When you're looking at RoboCop coming in, it's not Peter Weller, it's somebody else. Does that make it even more cartoony for you? It's okay, we're getting RoboCop, we got to promote this, but necessarily it's not the real RoboCop, you're getting a fake RoboCop.
Yeah, and I thought if we had Peter Weller, now this is, an afterthought. When we saw that, we had kicked around the ideas that after that was over, we'd shoot some stuff with Peter Weller as Peter Weller and let him talk about how great the show was, plug the movie, but also say, boy, this is some, get the rub from him. You know what I'm saying? Get a rub from him.
Absolutely.
And just inject it into the shows. But without him, you can't have a guy that's not the star of the show, you know what I mean? It'd be like, what was the movie that Rock just did with the girl that plays Wonder Woman? Where they were after, what's her name, the girl that plays Wonder Woman?
Gal Gadot.
Yeah. Do you know what the movie I'm talking about? Where he's a cop, and at the end, him and her stole the money.
Oh yeah, it was a Netflix movie, The Red Notice or something like that.
Yeah, I knew it was Red something. Yeah. And here's the thing. That would be like we're going to have him plug the show, And no disrespect, but we have the Barbarian there. You know what I mean? You
Yep.
get what I'm saying? It just,
Yeah, you're not getting the real deal here.
yeah, we couldn't do anything. And I think that might have been an out for us if we had Peter Weller, say, some of the greatest athletes I've ever seen. I was blown away. I enjoyed it. You know, I think it would be like trying to put a Band-Aid on a cut, you know, but it would have been easier for the wrestling fans to swallow that if he was Peter Weller talking about the company and the athletes rather than not having them there, you know, right off the bat. I'm sure people recognize that it wasn't him, don't you?
Oh, yeah. I would think so, almost immediately.
Yeah. So, I mean, right off the bat, you know, you've kind of shortchanged the people.
I was a big Peter Weller fan. I mean, obviously, I love him in RoboCop. He was great on Dexter when he was on. He's great on Longmire. I mean, everybody knows who he is too. So, I mean, instant credibility, a little push for you guys. But it's funny. It's like, nah, we'll send you a fake RoboCop that everyone knows is the fake RoboCop.
Yeah. It was different.
So when you guys have this and you have the creative, does Flair say anything? Like I mean, obviously he has to be okay with it to a certain point, but I don't know, I can't see him being too much on this, like, hey, let's really make RoboCop look good train, you know?
Well, I don't think anybody there thought that on the committee. Certainly not Jimmy. But there's nothing you can do. At the bottom of it, we're getting paid by Turner.
So with RoboCop, he's there. He's to promote RoboCop 2, but it's funny. He kind of overshadows, and it's a good show, I think, and I like a bunch of the matches. But it's funny. He's like, no matter what you guys did, it's going to be overshadowed by RoboCop. Did you have that sense of feeling even back then?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to sell wrestling, and we're knowing that Vince is more entertainment. We knew we dug ourselves in a hole, but we tried to do the best thing to get around it.
The other thing going into is Sting is injured. If you remember, he got injured earlier in the year. He was climbing that cage. He tore up his knee pretty bad. Did that completely screw up creative plans?
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was really getting over. I mean, not just getting over. He got over from the first Clash of the Champions, right, with Rick.
Oh, yeah.
So that was a huge, I mean, and we were talking about Eric. Wasn't this when Hurd was in charge?
Yes.
Yeah, so Eric wasn't involved, so Hurd probably pushed for it. And Hurd actually thought that guys were trying to injure Sting climbing that cage. I remember him saying that. You know.
It's a shame, too, because that was really, like, he's red hot. He's super over at this point. And the injury really hurts because it's like, okay, now we got to turn Luger babyface. We got to start this feud again. Like, you had to give Flair a top star to wrestle. And it was almost like you couldn't really give Luger the title, right? I mean, at this point, because it's almost like it's Sting's time.
Yeah. I mean, that was a devastating injury to Steve, and it was a really devastating injury for the company. You got a guy red hot, and now you erase him from the equation.
And is it also true that Flair said, I'm not losing to Luger. I promise Sting. This is Sting's time. Like, Flair was very on board with Sting being the next guy, the next champion.
Yeah, he definitely was. And there was nothing against Lex at all because Lex and Rick were tight. And Rick made Lex. But Rick had set his sights on handing it over to Stinger. You know, there's been a lot of things in Rick's career that had him keep the belt. You know what I mean? Let's go back in time. David Von Erich, right? He was supposed to get the belt from Rick. Magnum TA was supposed to get the belt from Rick. Barry Windham was supposed to get the belt from Rick. Sting was supposed to get the belt from Rick. When Ronnie Garvin got the belt, it actually was supposed to be Jimmy Garvin getting the belt, but Jimmy got a bad case of the gout and couldn't walk. So the belt would have been switched a bunch of different times if it weren't for these injuries. And who knows what projection they would have went on, you know what I mean? Especially right before this with David Von Erich and Magnum. You know, it's funny how things worked out. It's not funny, it's strange how things worked out.
So you basically have to wait till July, till Sting comes back. Basically 3 months, 2 months, whatever you want to say, till Sting comes back. Then he loses, or Sting beats Flair at the Great American Bash in an awesome match, and Sting becomes champion, and you go from there. But it's just interesting, like, wow, Luger's got to turn babyface again, and he's got to be, because he's like the real credible threat for the title, but he's got to be the babyface, and he's got to wrestle Flair in the main event. Would this pay-per-view would have been Sting winning the title, or would Sting have won it earlier if he wasn't injured?
I think I'm just trying to remember, but I think we were going to do something red hot, an angle with Rick, and we were going to go into a pay-per-view, and rather than drag it out, we were going to switch the belt to Sting. Because sometimes you got to be very careful when you're booking something that you got a way out of it. That's the right thing. You don't want to bring. It goes back to Sting and Hogan thing, right? We lost momentum there. I think that if Sting had won earlier and not got injured, we would have really taken off because the pieces were ready for Sting. He had Rick, he had a bunch of other heels lined up to work with. He was red hot, he was exciting, he was a new star. I think it would have been very good for the company.
Big thing here, not the return of RoboCop. To me, the big thing here is the return of the prodigal son, Tony Schiavone. He makes his first appearance back since Starrcade '88. Obviously, he left for the WWF for 1 full year and makes his return here. What do you think about Schiavone going to WWF and coming back? He was great in WWF, but almost seemed out of place. He seems more WCW to me.
I think so. I mean, he had been there through the days of Jimmy Crockett. He had that NWA label, and I agree with you. He looked out of place at WWE.
So big return there, and we start off the first match with you. So Norman the Lunatic and Hawk and Animal, a.k.a. the Road Warriors, with Paul Ellering, defeat Kevin Sullivan, Cactus Jack, and Bam Bam Bigelow with Oliver Humperdinck. 6-man tag action. The match goes almost 10 minutes. Pretty good way to kick off the show. Just what an interesting team. Norman the Lunatic and the Road Warriors.
Yeah. For some reason, and he was a very nice man, Norman, Mike Shaw. Kurt really liked his gimmick. And, what a contrast for the Road Warriors to have a partner.
Yeah, he's coming down the ring on a scooter, and they're coming to the ring on a motorcycle. So, right. I mean, big difference there.
Huge difference, but sometimes that works. You know.
Do you think it worked here?
No, not really. The Road Warriors, I've heard, time goes by. I just watched something on Bill Russell. You forget he won 11 championships in 13 years. The Road Warriors.
Pretty remarkable.
What?
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah. The Road Warriors, to me, were the greatest tag team of all times. But I think if you put somebody that was close to their size, it would have hurt the other guys because nobody worked like the Road Warriors. You know what I'm saying? A lot of guys tried to, but nobody got over like the Road Warriors. And Hawk's interviews were so entertaining. So I think it kind of worked here because it was like a little bit of comic relief for the Road Warriors. It showed a little bit of diversity in their performance.
To me, it's it's very comical, obviously, to put them with him, and they're coming out with motorcycles, he's coming out with a scooter. I mean, it's funny stuff, but he would obviously do a lot of other crazy gimmicks too. But Norman the Lunatic, I think, is just kind of just remember it as being very jokey.
It was, and I think that we understood that, but he was going to get pushed. I heard. So my thought is if someone's going to get pushed, you better do everything you can to get him right. Would I have done it
with
this day and age? No.
With the finish, you take the Doomsday device, if you will, from Hawk and Animal. Feel good to take that, or felt a little stiff taking it?
I had a great relationship with those guys. And was it stiff? Yeah, that's how they worked. I didn't mind them being stiff. But that's a hard bump to take. Because it feels like you're naked. If you get my drift, you got nothing but you to make this thing right.
Yep. It's funny, I was just talking to Wolfie D about it, and he would say Animal would have his hands underneath your thighs by your hamstrings,
yep.
And he'd assist you, like he'd help throw you back.
Yeah.
Just so you're not just going flat, you're almost taking a bit of a turn.
You did. That's how JJ broke his collarbone, if you remember.
Yes.
So that's why I said it was like you're up there naked. You know you're going to get an assist, and you got to get around.
The next matchup, and this is odd to say, but it might be two of the most powerful people in the history of WWE are about to go at it. And there's no way you knew this back in 1990, but Mean Mark Callis with Teddy Long defeats Johnny Ace in 10 minutes. Okay match, almost 11 minutes, really. I mean, okay match, nothing crazy, but who would have thought all these many years later, two of the most powerful men ever in history of WWE?
Yeah, too bad we didn't have a time machine, huh?
Yep, definitely not. And Undertaker wins with the heart punch here. But just pretty interesting to think, like, wow, like Johnny Ace, Undertaker, WCW, and to see what they were here. I mean, Johnny Ace is kind of doing the dynamic dudes jokey stuff, and obviously Mean Mark is nowhere even close to the Undertaker character.
No, but you can't teach height. What was Mark? Legitimately 6'9"?
Yep, definitely.
So why we didn't sign him to a long-term contract was one of the biggest mistakes we ever did. We did it with Austin, Tillman, a lot of other guys.
With that match, I mean, there's nothing spectacular, nothing special. But do you see something in him, though? Like, do you see, like, okay, we should keep this guy around? Because obviously Ole Anderson didn't see it.
Yeah, we all saw it. Rick saw it right from the beginning. Cornette, I think all of us, Ross, I think we all saw it right from the beginning. I mean, you could walk the ropes. I mean, I don't know how we learned that. Do you?
Not sure.
Probably Don Jardine.
Oh, yes. Yep. Yes, you're right.
Because he was in Texas at the same time, right?
Yes. Yep. Help train him. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, Mark could do some really athletic stuff. And to me, as much as people rave about The Undertaker, I don't think they realize nobody has drawn as much money for that length of time. I'd stack his drawing power against anybody, and I think he's going to come out on top for longevity. He's like the Brady of, wrestling. I mean, how many years do we pack people's asses in seats? I got to take my hat off to the guy. What Vince saw and how Mark took that character to a different level. I think he got the eye rolling from Mark Lewin, but he took it to a whole, that was Mark's gimmick way before he was the Purple Haze, when he was the Maniac in Texas. I think that you can't discount what Mark has meant to the business. But again, do you think I'm right? Has anybody ever drawn more money for that length of time?
Hey, tough. It's definitely tough to say. It's crazy.
And what about the streak? What about the streak? I'm sure they didn't realize they were going to do that until they got into about number 10.
Yes, it didn't seem like it. Like there wasn't any, because they didn't really promote it until really WrestleMania 18 when he gets to 10 and he starts doing the 10 fingers out, because then they start to say it.
Yeah. So, good for Mark that he got away and became one of the, if not the biggest drawing star of all times. I mean, what the guy has done over the length of time, I know I'm repeating myself, but to me it's amazing.
Next matchup, the Samoan SWAT team, Fatu and the Samoan Savage defeated Tommy Rich and Mike Rotunda. Crazy. This match went almost 18 minutes. Okay match, but man, it seems like way too much time given to this one.
Yep. And I can't remember why, but I think that probably Jody was the guy that did the timing, and maybe there was somebody that was injured and couldn't go too long. But 18 minutes is a long time to go.
Especially because Rich and Rotunda aren't really a tag team. You know what I mean? It's like
right.
Two singles guys putting together against the SWAT team.
Yeah. I've never liked that, throwing two guys in together. We did it, There's a lot of things you look back on and say, well, why did we do it? And I'd like to know the answer myself, but they were talented enough to be able to go 18 minutes. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
But
the Samoan SWAT team here, obviously, are the brothers, Fatu and Tonga Kid, which was an interesting marriage, because usually it's Samu Fatu, but here it's the Samoan Savage, a.k.a. Tonga Kid.
I wrestled the Samoan Kid in a chain match in Portland, Maine, when he weighed about 185 pounds.
Oh, hard to believe he ever was that small.
Yeah. Do you remember him with Snuka?
Oh, yes. Yep.
Remember how small he was?
Yeah, he wasn't that big. Yeah, well, comparatively, forget it, when here in 1990, he's huge.
Yeah.
So we have Paul Ellering up next in a hair versus hair match, and he defeats Teddy Long in 2 minutes. This is not a good one. Let's just say that. Just entertaining, I guess, but not great.
Yeah. It was a gimmick match. Teddy wanted to get his hair cut anyway. And Teddy had never had really any wrestling experience, but Teddy could talk. I mean, he could really talk. So I think that's why. Not going to say that it was a barn burner, but we produced, I've seen a lot of people not get their hair cut the right way, but Teddy did.
Was it weird putting on, like, okay, we got to do RoboCop, now we're going to do very sports entertainment, like hair versus hair match between two managers? Was that kind of going against you, or you like throwing in some sports entertainment into the mix?
It has its place, but if you had Bobby Heenan, who was a great wrestler, people don't understand how good a wrestler Bobby Heenan was. Did you ever see any tapes of Bobby wrestling, the Bruiser and the Crusher?
Yeah, see some AWA clips. I don't know if I've really seen longer matches, but he was bumping like crazy, bumping and selling and feeding like crazy.
Yeah, he used to work for the Bruiser for a long time until Bruiser shortened him on a payoff of Big House. I mean, he was a great performer, and he was a wrestler before he was a manager.
So the next thing up is Gordon Soley tells us that RoboCop is in the house. He's in the building, which I'm sure relieved everybody who think that he wasn't going to be there, but he's there. There's an interview with Shivani with the Steiner brothers. They do a little sweepstakes thing where Gary Michael Cabot announces that an older couple had won the Capital Combat sweepstakes. I mean, a lot of stuff going on here. We got to the Horsemen cutting a promo, and they're all fired up. So you got all this kind of other stuff kind of going on outside of the ring before we head to the next match. Midnight Express, Bobby Eaton and Stan Lane defeated Brian Pillman and Tom Zink to retain the NWA United States Tag Team Championship in 20 minutes. Gave this match a lot of time, and it is great. Love this match. Jim Cornette, by the way, also locked in a cage.
It's funny that you brought that match up. I was thinking the other day about Bobby and Stan Lane. There's a team that doesn't get the credit they deserve. First of all, Bobby was one of the greatest talents in the history of the business. The only thing that held Bobby back was that he couldn't cut an interview, but Jimmy covered that. And Stan had charisma up the ass. And I thought they were a great tag team.
Man, to me, one of the greatest tag teams of all time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Love the Midnight Express. So good. Especially for some reason, I mean, I love Dennis, but I know I just love the pairing with Sweet Stan and Bobby too. For some reason, it was right in my wheelhouse. Just really, really enjoyed those two as a team together. And the match here against a young Pillman and a young Zink just shows you how good they work as they carry them to a great match.
Yeah, I mean, I got a chance to work with Bobby a few times And he made everybody look better than they were. And Stan was a very solid worker himself, but Bobby made everybody better. And you upped your game because you were in with Bobby. Not that people lag, but when you're in with Bobby, you're on your toes because you know you're in with a master. It's like getting a master class. And no disrespect to Pillman or Zink, God rest their souls, that they could get the best out of two young guys. You got to realize that both of them, Pillman and Zink, hadn't been in the business that long, even though they had been around. You know, Brian had, I believe, just came from Calgary, right?
Yes.
And where did Zink come from? Minnesota?
Yep.
Where he hadn't been featured. So
not at all.
So these kids got the spotlight on them, and it didn't hurt them to lose to one of the greatest tag teams of all times.
Then, speaking of one of the greatest teams of all time, the Rock and Roll Express, Ricky Morton, Robert Gibson defeat the Fabulous Freebirds in a corporal punishment match where they were talking about the straps. They didn't really use them as much, didn't go into it as much, but R&R get the victory in about 18 minutes here. Pretty good match. Another really, long tag team match here.
Yeah, we're trying to feature the tag teams too because we had so many good ones. I'll give you a little backstory on Ricky Morton. Ricky was trained by one of the greatest baby faces of all times. When I say trained by him, he was his partner when he was a young boy, Ken Lucas. Jack Briscoe said that Ken Lucas was in the top 5 guys he ever wrestled. Bobby Shane and Ken Lucas lit up the Gulf Coast. They were the first guys to go to the big building in Mobile, the Dome there, and they sold it out. Actually, Bobby wrestled Lou Fields on the first show and sold it out, and then they came back with Kenny. Kenny knew how to sell, and I think that Ricky picked up a lot of the selling from Ken. And I think they'll tell you that to this day.
Well, here's the moment you've all been waiting for. RoboCop is in the building as Sting comes out, big pop. The Horsemen come out, Sid and the Andersons beat up Sting, kind of abruptly, and they put him in the cage. And he basically, he can't get out. He's stuck. RoboCop comes out, rips the cage door off, and lets Sting out. Sting and RoboCop chase away the Horsemen. What do you think about this?
Horrible. We have an actor pulling a cage door off. He's no Blackjack Mulligan. He's no Doug Furness who could do that. Doug was the strongest man in the world. Blackjack Mulligan was 6'9", had 24-inch arms. RoboCop, I think anybody that was enjoying the show up until this point went, oh. As Arn Anderson would say, it was a 2-fingered stinker.
Man, it's just crazy because, okay, you got RoboCop, you're promoting him, but, that's it. He rips off the cage, the Horsemen run away, and, that's it. That was it for RoboCop. So it wasn't like this, I don't know, big, great thing. It was just, that's it. Not good at all.
No. He did his shtick. That was given to us by the North Tower. That's what they wanted. That's what they got.
Yeah, I don't know what more we could say about RoboCop other than not great. Not good. So then we go to the not announce table, but the announce area where Junkyard Dog is telling everybody he's back. He's been all over the world. He's been competing in places like Japan, but now he's back home in the NWA. Cornette comes out, starts talking about the Midnight Express, starts kind of bad-mouthing JYD. He's saying, where have you been? We've been here winning titles. So the Junkyard Dog brilliantly says to Cornette, gives him an exact address, and Cornette realizes, hey, that's my mother's house. So kind of just a little funny thing between JYD and Cornette.
Yeah. I happen to be watching some of the YouTube this week, and I saw some stuff on the Midnight Express, and every time Jimmy got cornered or anything, his facial expressions were so good. And, he's one of the greatest managers of all times, They talk about the Rushmore of wrestlers. Jimmy's up in the Rushmore of managers, that's for sure.
Schiavone interviews the world's strongest man at this point, Doug Furnas, which is interesting as he's coming in and kind of making a name for himself. And then Sting has an interview where he does address the fact that Luger is going for the title. He says if he was in Luger's position, he would do the same exact thing because I'm hurt, meaning that Sting is hurt. So you guys at least addressed that, which is good.
Yeah, and Doug Furnas should have been a huge star. The first match he ever had, he sold the building out in Knoxville, Tennessee. We did an angle, him and I. In Knoxville, there's a part of, I don't know if it's still there, but the hot place, it was Old Town. And every business guy would go to the restaurants for lunch there, and they had one that you got the old Coca-Cola in the small bottles, and they had a Coca-Cola, where you opened it up and you reached in and got a Coke out of the ice. And everybody went there, and they were getting ready for Doug to get into the business. And he was having lunch with the local promoter, Bobby Polk. And I came in, and I was seated close to their table. And Bobby Polk picked up the tab for him and Doug, and I took my receipt and threw it at Bobby, and I said, well, pay for mine too. And Doug and I had some words, not too much, but it got a little loud. People saw it, and they knew that Doug, he had been to the University of Tennessee, he had the rushing records, a great running back. His brother played on the same team, and he had just broken the world squat record. I think he had 22 world records overall. And there was a match in Knoxville, and it was me and Ronald Fuller in a cage, and this is about tearing the cage door off. I said, Doug, before we even got there. I kicked Ronald out of the cage, locked the cage as the promoter came in, and I whacked Bobby, and Bobby got blood, and Doug came down, and he ripped the cage door off, and when he stepped in, I hard-weighed him. And he had 23 stitches above his eye. And he just stuck his head out there and let me do it. And Johnny Majors was one of the greatest coaches of all times that had coached Doug, and he got on. People kind of thought it was real because of Doug. They didn't think he'd do anything phony. And Johnny Majors says, I don't know if wrestling's real or if Sullivan's real, but Doug Furnas is real. And he plugged the show, and Doug sold out the first time he ever came into the ring. Why he didn't get the push, I don't know. I think he got enamored with Japan. He had a great deal there. So when you started to push him, he'd have to go back to Japan for 3 to 5 weeks. So in one way, it was a blessing to him, and another way, it was a curse. You know what I'm saying? Because if you're starting to push him and you're getting into something, and he's going to be gone for 5 weeks, well, that's a lifetime when you're not on TV for 5 weeks, because it's longer than 5 weeks. You know, it's the week before you go. You're probably not going to be on TV because there's nothing you can do, and the week you come back. So it's about 7 weeks you're not on TV. So it costs Doug, and I really, really admired Doug. I saw him squat 1,002.5 pounds with no wraps. He had a belt on, and he did it 2 reps. 1,002.5 pounds, JP.
Wow. Jeez. What a freak.
Did you ever see his thighs?
Oh, monstrous. Crazy.
Yeah. Back in that time, I was a pretty good squatter myself, and I thought my legs were big. I looked like the scarecrow with my legs compared to him. He was made, and he could vertically leap too. Remember his drop kicks? How perfect they were.
One of the best, yeah.
Yeah.
So then we have Doom, Ron Simmons and Butch Reed with Teddy Long, the new bald Teddy Long, who likes to wear his little do-rag, defeated the Steiner brothers, Rick and Scott, for the NWA World Tag Team titles. Match goes over 19 minutes. Another good match here, as Doom is the new champions. What do you think? A surprising victory here from Doom, who's getting this big push.
Yeah. I think that we all on the committee recognize the talents between Ron Simmons and Butch Reed. I've told you that story where I wanted to make Ron Simmons the world heavyweight champion on Martin Luther King Day.
Yes. Yep.
And Coretta King give him the belt, and Martin Luther III be there. And all he said to me, "That's not going to draw any money." I said, "Oh, okay."
Crazy.
Said, yeah, the press would have been all over that. First black heavyweight champion.
No doubt about that. And of course, after the match, Doom is ecstatic that they beat the Steiners for the world titles. Pretty big upset, but obviously Doom's going to end up holding the titles for a very long time. I think over 280 days. So they get a nice run out of it for sure.
They sure did, and they deserved it too. And the Steiners were gracious enough to, there was no boo-boo faces with those guys. They were really wanting to see Doom get over because they knew there was money there to be made.
For sure. So then the main event of the evening is a NWA World Title Steel Cage match with Lex Luger defeating Ric Flair by disqualification. First of all, the cage is a little bit weirder because it's a bigger cage where you can actually walk around the floor. So it's a different cage. I know they used it for Havoc 89 when it was Sting and Flair versus Muta and Funk. But it's just an interesting cage. It's definitely different. Do you have any idea like why the different cage or who set this up?
Truthfully, I think it was a mistake. I think somebody thought the ring was 22 feet rather than a 20-footer or 18-footer. And that's why it was built that way, I believe, anyway.
For this, though, do you also like a DQ finish for a steel cage match?
No.
Seems like that should never happen.
No, it should never have happened.
Because Barry Windham, they lift up the cage a little bit. Windham sneaks in, he attacks Luger, and they go for the DQ. After that, Sting comes down, tries to make the save, and then Elegante, the 7'7" monster, makes his WCW debut and kind of scares off the Four Horsemen. What do you think about that, Elegante?
He was under contract, personal service contract to Ted Turner. We were told to push him. At that time, he didn't have the goofy suit on. He had some publicity. He again, you can't cheat height. And I think they did the DQ because, I'm just surmising this because Rick took care of his matches. I think they did the DQ because, first of all, they didn't know how much longer this thing would be out. And they knew they had to go around, and they knew Rick couldn't go around in every town with Luger. So that's why Barry was introduced, I believe.
Do you like having this 7'7" freak at your disposal, or you know he can't really work or do much, that it's not great? I mean, obviously WWF saw something in him too because they bring him in as Giant Gonzalez and he fused with the Undertaker. So what did you think about it, like as far as booking him?
Well, I knew we had to do it because personal service contract to Ted Turner. He's not on WCW, and he's the guy that writes your checks, and he wants this done. Do you remember when he managed the Braves for one day?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Same thing. Yeah. He was going to be the manager for the rest of the season. He took one day to understand he didn't know anything about baseball. So, and smart enough to quit.
What do you think overall of the pay-per-view? Because Luger versus Flair is good, just didn't like the finish. Doom Steiners is good. Midnight Express match is great. And even your match, the opener, was pretty good. Not great, but it was pretty good. So what do you think overall of the show, and did RoboCop ruin it?
Yes. Yeah, RoboCop ruined it. But because of some of those tag matches, I got to give thumbs in the middle. Because everybody worked hard. And we kind of was trying to create something for tag teams. So we build up our tag team division. So I think we got that over. But when I said I'm giving a thumb in the middle, I'm giving a thumb in the middle heading down.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Because you had the return of Schiavone, the debut of Elegante, and of course the return of RoboCop. But let's hit the plugs. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. Check out the website tmptempire.com. Of course, go to Pro Wrestling Tees, ProWrestlingTees.com, and hit the Kevin Sullivan store. You can also follow Kevin on Instagram at Taskmaster Talks. Kevin, what else you got going on?
I'll be in New York and Brooklyn the 19th through the 21st, and then I'll be in Toronto from the 27th, 28th, and 29th. So all our friends that follow us, that follow me and JP, please come out and say hello. And thank you very much for the show.
Great stuff, as always. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, everybody out there, for listening. We'll see you right back here next week for old Taskmaster Talks.